You're not useful to me anymore." My wife said it while looking straight through me, the way you'd look past a piece of furniture you've decided to replace. Not at home over coffee. Not in the car on the way back from church. She said it at the head of a conference table that cost more than most people's cars, in front of 11 board members, the CFO, and a corporate attorney who couldn't stop clicking his pen. You're not useful to me anymore. Not here. Not anywhere. Then she opened a manila folder and slid a set of documents toward me. Divorce papers.
That morning,
My name, Hank Mercer, printed in neat black type across the top. Shelby Whitfield Mercer had timed it perfectly. Same week her father stepped down as CEO of Whitfield Development Group. Same meeting where the board confirmed her as his successor. Same room where I had sat for 31 years helping build every deal that kept the lights on in that building. I looked at the papers, looked at her, and I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I had been expecting this for 6 years. 10 minutes earlier, the room had been applauding. Grant Whitfield, 82 years old and finally slowing down, had stood at the lectern with his reading glasses balanced on the tip of his nose. He gave a short speech about legacy and continuity, the kind of speech men give when they want to believe the thing they built will outlive them. Then he introduced Shelby. She stood up in her navy blazer, pearl brooch on the lapel, the one her mother used to wear. She thanked the board, thanked her father, thanked the leadership team for their dedication and vision. She did not thank me. I noticed, but I wasn't surprised. For 31 years, I had been the one who turned Whitfield Development from a regional home builder into a commercial real estate firm, managing over $900 million in active projects across 5 states. I negotiated the anchor tenant agreements. I structured the joint ventures. I built the relationships with municipal planning boards and zoning commissions. That took years of patience and handshakes and showing up to county meetings that nobody else wanted to attend. Shelby was the presentation. I was the plumbing. When the applause faded and the corporate attorney began reviewing the succession timeline, Shelby raised one finger. Before we continue, she said, "There's a personal matter I want to address directly." I watched the room shift. People straightened in their seats. She turned to me with an expression I'd seen her practice in our bathroom mirror. Controlled. Rehearsed. "Hank and I are separating," she said. "Divorce papers have been filed. I believe this transition is best for the company and for both of us. Given the circumstances, I'm recommending that Hank step away from his role in development operations to avoid any conflict of interest." Silence. Someone at the far end of the table cleared his throat. The attorney stopped clicking his pen. Shelby looked at me, waiting. She wanted a reaction. Anger, maybe. Pleading. Something she could use to prove I was emotional, unstable, unfit. Instead, I leaned forward, slightly, picked up the folder, and placed it inside my briefcase. "Understood," I said. "Congratulations on the appointment." Her left eye twitched. Just barely. Nobody else would have caught it. But I'd been married to that face for 28 years. She expected a fight. She got composure. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and nodded to the room. "I won't take up any more of your time," I said. Then I walked out. The hallway was quiet. My shoes made a soft sound against the marble floor, the same marble I had sourced from a quarry outside Asheville, the Bildill, 12 years ago when we renovated the building. I stopped at the window near the elevator. Downtown Charlotte stretched out below, cranes dotting the skyline like mechanical birds. I had helped put 3 of those buildings there. My phone buzzed. A text from Tessa, my assistant of 19 years. "What just happened?" I typed back, "Come to my office. We need to talk." When I sat down at my desk, everything looked the same. Framed photos from project dedications. A glass award from the Charlotte Business Journal. The leather chair that had shaped itself to my back over 2 decades. But the room felt borrowed now, like a hotel you're checking out of. Tessa appeared in the doorway. Her face told me she already knew. She did it, didn't she? She filed. I nodded, in front of everyone, and she wants you out of development. That's what she said. Tessa closed the door behind her and sat down. Her hands were shaking slightly. She's out of her mind, she whispered. She's strategic, I corrected. There's a difference. Are you okay? I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a brown leather binder, thick with tabbed dividers, each one labeled in my own handwriting. I set it on the desk. I've been okay for 6 years, I said. Tessa stared at the binder. What is that? Mercer Strategic Partners, I replied. 6 years ago, when Grant first started talking about handing things to Shelby, I had seen where this was going. Not because I distrusted my wife, because I understood how legacy works. Legacy follows blood. It doesn't follow competence. So I had done what any builder does when the ground shifts. I poured a new foundation. Mercer Strategic Partners was a consulting firm, legally separate from Whitfield Development, approved by the board as an efficiency measure. It handled contract negotiation, municipal coordination, and tenant procurement for our largest projects. Over 6 years, with full board authorization, I had structured it so that the primary strategic relationships, the ones that generated real revenue, ran through Mercer, not Whitfield. Whitfield executed construction and property management. Mercer held the client relationships, the vendor agreements, the zoning approvals. On paper, it looked like an optimization. In practice, it was a lifeboat. 22 of our top revenue accounts were structured this way. Not hidden, not disguised. Just built quietly while everyone was watching Shelby rehearse her speeches. You knew, Tessa said. I knew power changes people, I replied. I just didn't want to be standing in the road when it did. My phone rang. It was Abel Hargrove, CEO of Hargrove Hospitality, our largest commercial tenant across 3 mixed-use developments. Hank, he said, skipping any greeting. I just got an email from Shelby Whitfield saying she's my new point of contact. What's going on? I leaned back in my chair. There have been some leadership changes, I said, but our agreement hasn't changed. Our agreement is with you, Abel said firmly. With Mercer Strategic, that's correct. Then that's where we stay. When the call ended, Tessa was still watching me. She doesn't know, does she? Tessa asked. She never read the contract headers, I said quietly. She called the whole structure Hank's paperwork hobby and skipped every review meeting. For 6 years, Shelby had looked at the executive summaries, the polished versions, the shine. She never once opened the binder. Here's the thing about our marriage that nobody at that table understood. Shelby and I met 32 years ago at a development conference in Savannah. She was 26, sharp, ambitious, already carrying the weight of being Grant Whitfield's daughter in an industry that didn't take women seriously. I was 30, working as a project manager for a mid-size firm in Raleigh, presenting on adaptive reuse of old textile mills. She challenged my numbers during the Q&A. I told her she was wrong and showed her why. After the session, she found me at the hotel bar and said, I like that you didn't back down. I told her I liked that she pushed hard enough to make me prove it. For a long time, that balance held. She was brilliant in rooms. She could read people, remember names, make a city councilman feel like the most important person at the table. I was the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning running numbers, reviewing environmental impact reports, finding the clause in a zoning ordinance that would save a project 6 months and $1 million. When Grant brought me into Whitfield as head of development, he told me privately, "You're the engine, Hank. She'll learn to drive, but you keep the thing running." For years, it worked. I negotiated the Hargrove Hospitality deal when every other developer in Charlotte had walked away from it. I restructured the Pemberton Medical Campus project when the original financing collapsed 6 weeks before groundbreaking. I brought in the city's first mixed-use transit corridor development, which alone accounted for $140 million over 5 years. Shelby presented these wins at board meetings, and she presented them well. But I noticed over the years that whenever a client said Hank's deal or Hank's team, something in her posture changed. A tightening around the mouth, a slight turn of the head. And whenever Grant praised operational growth, he would say, "Shelby has assembled a strong supporting cast." Supporting cast. Not partner, not co-builder. Cast. The first time I heard talk about succession, it wasn't from Shelby. It was from a board member at a golf outing who assumed I already knew the plan. "You'll keep running development," he said, chipping onto the green. "Shelby handles the board and the public side. You keep doing what you do." That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed, "Mercer Strategic Partners, structure out of anger." Out of anger. Out of arithmetic. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Shelby. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Why are clients calling me confused?" she demanded. "Have you looked at the contract headers?" I asked. "What are you talking about?" "The service agreements," I said calmly. "Who they're actually signed with." Silence. "Then? You moved them. They were structured with board approval 6 years ago," I corrected. "You signed off on the resolution. You can't just." "I didn't just," I said. "I built." The silence that followed was heavier than anything she'd said in that boardroom. The next morning, I arrived at the building before 6. The lobby was dim, security guard half asleep at the desk. My badge still worked. I took the elevator to the 8th floor and walked through the executive wing in the gray light of early morning. My office smelled faintly of carpet shampoo. They must have cleaned overnight for the new CEO. I started packing. Not fast, not angry, just steady. Each item into a box. 31 years fitting into cardboard. At 6:40, my phone rang. Abel Hargrove again. "My legal team pulled the master agreement," he said. "Shelby's email references Whitfield as our primary partner. That's incorrect." "Our structure hasn't changed," I said. "Mercer holds the strategic contract. Whitfield handles construction execution. If you're no longer at Whitfield, Mercer Strategic continues to operate independently." "Good. Because we signed with you, Hank, not a last name on a building." By 7:30, 3 more calls had come in. Pemberton Medical, Southeast Logistics Group, a procurement director from a municipal housing authority, asking politely whether his project was going to be disrupted. It wasn't chaos. Not yet. It was the early tremor before the quake. At 8:15, my door opened without a knock. Shelby stood in the frame, charcoal dress, hair pulled back tight. Only her eyes were unsteady. "You moved them," she said again, stepping inside and closing the door. "I structured them," I said again, "with board approval." "You never told me the scope. I presented the proposal 6 years ago. You said it sounded like a waste of your time." Her jaw set hard. "You did this because you didn't trust me. I did this because I understood what happens to people who don't prepare." She came closer to the desk. "I am your wife." "For now," I said. That stopped her. "You've put this company at risk," she said. "No, you did. When you assumed a title was the same thing as leverage." Her nostrils flared. "This is sabotage." "This is structure," I replied. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Charlotte was waking up outside the window. Traffic thickening, sun cutting through the gaps between buildings. "There's an emergency board meeting at 10, she said. "They want you there. I won't be attending." "You're still under contract." "You asked me to step away from operations yesterday," I said, "in front of witnesses. That was before I understood." "The scope hasn't changed," I said evenly. "Only your awareness of it." She stared at me with something between fury and recognition. "You've been planning to leave." "I've been planning not to disappear," I corrected. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. "3 more clients have called," she said tightly. I nodded. "Their contracts don't have your name on them." She left without another word. Through the glass, I could see executives gathering down the hall, murmuring. I picked up my box and took one last look around the office. 31 years. I carried it to the elevator. At 9:12, Tessa texted me. 6 people from development have already asked if you're hiring. I smiled. At 62, I was supposed to be winding down. Instead, I was winding up. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, legal pad beside me, coffee going cold. Tessa had resigned at 9:20. Donovan Burke, my senior project director, texted at 9:31. If you're building something, I'm in. Don't sign anything yet, I told him. Wait for clarity. At 9:40, my attorney called. Priya Sandoval didn't bother with pleasantries. Emergency board meeting at 10 sharp, she said. They're calling it a discussion on client continuity. Continuity, I repeated. They're choosing their words carefully. Are you going? As your representative, yes. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling fan. Good. Bring the contract summaries. You think they haven't read them. I think some of them signed things they never understood. At 10:40, Priya called back. You would have enjoyed this, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear a trace of satisfaction underneath. Shelby opened by accusing you of breach of fiduciary duty. She claimed you redirected core revenue away from the company. And? 2 board members interrupted her. Chambers and Yoon. Chambers was old-school real estate finance. Yoon was the quiet one who never spoke unless numbers were wrong. They said they remembered approving the Mercer structure 6 years ago, Priya continued. They asked for the original board minutes. I provided them. I could picture it, Shelby at the head of the table, watching the pages get passed around, reading the language she had ignored for half a decade. They read the addendum out loud, Priya said. Primary strategic contractor, Mercer Strategic Partners, LLC, fulfillment and construction partner, Whitfield Development Group. And then? Then nobody talked for about 45 seconds. Because numbers don't argue, I said. They just sit there. The board asked Shelby whether she had reviewed the contractual architecture before announcing your transition. She said she had relied on executive summaries. Executive summaries. The polished version. The shine. They're concerned, Priya went on. Not about legality. About leverage. One of them asked, and I'm reading my notes here, if Mercer Strategic disengages, what's our exposure? What did you say? That Mercer has no obligation to disengage, but it also has no obligation to continue under the same terms. There was a pause. They authorized a proposal, Priya said, to retain Mercer Strategic as a long-term partner. Multi-year contract, guaranteed minimums, performance escalators. I let out a slow breath. They pushed me out and now they want to hire my company. That's the shape of it. What did Shelby say? She objected. She argued it undermines her authority. And the board's position? Priya's voice dropped slightly. Authority without revenue is ceremonial. I felt that sentence settle deep in my chest. At noon, I walked out onto my back porch. The dogwood tree I planted the year we bought this house was in full bloom, white petals bright against the gray fence. 26 years in this house. I'd poured the patio slab myself one Saturday when the kids were small, mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow, while my son handed me tools he couldn't name yet. Now my son was in Denver, my daughter in Atlanta, and the woman I'd shared this house with had decided I was furniture to be removed. My phone buzzed. Donovan again. HR is offering retention bonuses. They're panicking. Don't sign, I replied. Not yet. At 4:30, I walked into a coffee shop on East Boulevard. Shelby was already there, sitting by the window with a cup she hadn't touched. She didn't stand when I sat down. She didn't smile. You look tired, she said. So do you. She exhaled. Chambers and Yoon blindsided me. They acted like this was all obvious. It was documented, I said. You could have told me what you were really building. I did. 6 years ago. You said it was a waste of time. She stared at her coffee. I didn't divorce you to humiliate you, she said finally. You did it in front of 11 people, I replied. She was quiet for a moment. I needed to prove I wasn't just Grant Whitfield's daughter married to the guy who runs everything. Did it work? I asked. No, she said. It didn't. I watched a bus pass outside the window. An old man crossed the street slowly, leaning on a cane, taking his time because time was the only thing left that belonged to him entirely. I understood that man. You assumed I'd fold, I said, that I'd walk out quietly, and the clients, the relationships, 31 years of work would just transfer to you like furniture in a divorce settlement. That's how transitions work, she said. For employees, I replied, not for builders. She looked away. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm 62 years old, Shelby. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm just not willing to be erased. What do you want? She asked. Stability, I said. For the clients, for the team, for myself. The board is drafting an offer. I know, she leaned forward. If I recommend the partnership formally as CEO, it shows leadership. It shows clarity, I agreed. And us? That's separate, is it? Yes. Something shifted in her face. Not anger. Something older and sadder. You'd really walk away from 28 years. You already did, I said gently. I did it in a boardroom in front of 11 people. You did. I watched her process that. For the first time since she'd slid those papers across the table, Shelby Whitfield Mercer looked like someone confronting the weight of what she'd done. Not a CEO. Not a daughter proving herself. Just a woman sitting across from a man she had underestimated for 3 decades. I'll recommend the partnership, she said. 3 years. Competitive terms. That's a start. And after that, I said, standing up, see whether respect can be rebuilt, or whether it was ever really there. She didn't extend her hand, neither did I. When she walked out, she moved differently, not smaller, just more aware of the space around her. I sat back down and opened my laptop. Mercer Strategic Partners. Phase 1 expansion. By that evening, I had confirmed provisional agreements with 2 general contractors outside the Whitfield network, drafted offers for 9 team members, and received commitments from 4 major clients who wanted to follow the structure, not the surname. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud and wasteful. This was infrastructure. 3 weeks later, Mercer Strategic Partners operated out of a converted warehouse space near South End. Exposed ductwork, standing desks, whiteboards covered in project timelines and zoning maps. 9 employees working long days. Donovan ran project coordination with the steady focus of a man who had spent 15 years waiting to be trusted. Tessa handled client relations with the precision of someone who had seen how the other side operated and wanted no part of it anymore. The first time a permit approval came through on a project we managed independently of Whitfield, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication. Momentum. On day 24, Priya called. 3 years strategic partner, she said. 3 years, guaranteed minimums, performance escalators, autonomy clauses, and a 4% advisory stake. Non-voting but profit participating. Shelby? She fought it. The board gave her a choice. Sign the partnership or face a vote of confidence. She signed. There was no victory in hearing that. Just the quiet weight of a thing finally settling into its correct position. The following Monday, Grant Whitfield called. He asked to meet at the steakhouse he'd been going to for 40 years, the one with dark paneling and cloth napkins and waiters who remembered your drink. He looked older than I'd seen him. Not frail. Weathered. You've done something I didn't expect, he said after the water was poured. I structured something sustainable, I replied. He nodded slowly. I should have made you CEO. The words landed harder than I expected. I didn't need the title, I said. But you earned it. Maybe. But earning and receiving don't always happen in the same room. He was quiet for a moment. She wants you back. As co-CEO, I studied his face. And? She'd step into a chief strategy role. And reconciliation? I asked, because I knew he didn't look away. She's hoping. I set my napkin on the table. No. He didn't seem surprised. I won't come back as a symbol of family unity, I said. Mercer is stable. We're growing. We have relationships independent of Whitfield. And our marriage was over the moment she decided to make it a performance. That evening, Shelby came to the warehouse office unannounced. Donovan saw through the glass door and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She looked different, less composed, more direct. "I won't beg," she said as soon as the door closed. "I didn't expect you to. They offered you the co-CEO position." I declined. She blinked. "Why? Because I don't want to rebuild inside a structure that only values me when it's afraid of losing me." She stood very still. "For years," she said quietly, "I felt like I was standing in your shadow." That surprised me. "You were never in my shadow," I said. "I was the face," she replied. "You were the foundation." "People don't notice foundations until the house starts cracking." "I never wanted the spotlight," I said. "I wanted to be treated like what I built mattered. And you think this proves it? No. This is just what happens when someone who's been building quietly for 30 years stops holding up the ceiling for free." We stood there for a long time, the sound of keyboards and low conversation drifting through the walls. "I made a mistake," she said. "Yes, I confused being in charge with being independent. Yes, I thought removing you would prove I was strong enough to lead alone. It proved something," I replied. "Just not what you meant." Her shoulders dropped. "I don't want to be your enemy," she said. "You're not. But we're not partners anymore." "Not in marriage. Not in marriage," I agreed. "Business? Business is cleaner. It runs on contracts, not assumptions." A faint, tired smile crossed her face. "You were always better with contracts, and you were always better with rooms." The divorce went through quietly over the following months. No spectacle, no public blame, just paperwork. Clean and structured, like the agreements that had carried me through. Mercer Strategic Partners crossed $35 million in annualized revenue by the end of the second quarter. 27 employees. 5-state footprint, and, in an irony that I still appreciate, Whitfield Development Group as our largest construction execution partner. 6 months after that boardroom meeting, I was standing on the rooftop of a mixed-use building in the Noda Arts District, one of the first projects Mercer had developed independently. The Charlotte skyline stretched out to the south, cranes still turning, the city still building. I thought about that morning, the envelope sliding across the table, the 11 faces watching me, the words, "You're not useful to me anymore." She thought she was discarding me. She was releasing me. At 62, most men in my position would be thinking about retirement, about slowing down, about the chair on the porch and the grandkids on the weekends. And I think about those things too. But that morning taught me something I should have learned decades ago. You don't wait for people to recognize what you've built. You build until the thing speaks for itself, and if someone removes your name from a door, you pour a new foundation and put up a better one. If this resonated with you, if you've ever been told you weren't needed, if you've ever been the one doing the work while someone else took the bow, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? What moment in your life made you stop asking for permission and start building your own thing? Leave it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, about people who found their footing after the ground was pulled out from under them, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes the most important thing you build isn't a company or a career. It's the version of yourself that nobody can take away.